ask that you guide us in our decision making, protect us and the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen.
I'd like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today and pay my respects to elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. This council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. Albury City accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations, I haven't received any, Mr. Zacknich.
Political donations.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The advice to the council meeting relates to the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. Section 10.4 requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of the council. Reportable political donation include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on the Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Accordingly, the provisions of Section 4.151 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the Council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of Council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 9.3 of Part 9 of that Act. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Zacknich. That brings us to the apologies for tonight. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move that Council receive, note and accept the apologies of Councillor K. Mack, Councillor G. Doxey and Councillor H. Van der Ven and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second that, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, would you like to speak to that?
Not overly.
I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. There is no mayoral minute tonight, which brings us to the action plans. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move that the following action plans be received and noted. 1. Actions complete for noting only. 2. Actions awaiting response from external parties. 3. Actions in progress. And 4. Long-term issues, brackets, no more than 3 months, close brackets.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, would you like to speak to the action plans?
This week, no, thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Councillors, all those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. That brings us to the confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, 10th of February 2020 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, would you like to speak to those minutes? Thanks. Councillors, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. We have no reports from community forums, no notices of motion or rescission, no presentations and deputations, which brings us to the minutes of committees and working parties. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move the minutes and recommendations of the Les O'Brien Athletics Precinct Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday, 5th of February 2020 be received, noted and accepted.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second that, Madam.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, would you like to speak to those minutes?
Thank you.
Thanks. Councillors, all those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. We have no documents for sealing this evening. That brings us to the officers' reports for consideration. Need a mover, please, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I believe that I should move an amended motion. I move that this report be deferred until a full council meeting with 9 councillors present occur.
Do we have a seconder for that motion, Councillor Cameron?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay. Councillor Stutchbury, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Look, this is a controversial DA. I mean, it's been before us 3 times now, and there have been speakers against it in a public forum at a couple of meetings, and I think that this DA requires all 9 councillors be present to debate it fully. That's all. Simple as that. Mathematics. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Stutchbury. I haven't got any indication of any further speakers for Councillor Glacken to speak against.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I do appreciate the numbers, 5 of the 9 councillors. However, my reading of this report, the presentations that we've received, and also an appreciation of what we can and can't do as councillors, leads me to the conclusion that we should deal with this tonight. And I believe that this has been delayed long enough. These developers, whether any of us like it or not, have approval to develop this lot. They have approval to develop it in such a way that is not what we as a community would want in the longer term. And I believe that whilst we could continue to delay this, that they could also turn around and continue with their development that would not be favourable to us as a community in the longer term. I think to approve this would be, this application tonight would be a better option. I believe that they have, in good faith, agreed to undertake some additional works. They have a number of checks and balances agreed with the staff that they would need to undertake to ensure that the development can proceed. And I think we could add another, for example, the treatment along Urunna Road. I was looking through my report earlier to find the section on page 33 electronically with reference to the drainage reserve required by condition A2. I think we could use similar wording to that with regards to the appropriate treatment along the development's boundary facing Urunna Road, that it could be submitted and require approval by council prior to the construction certificate, etc., which would take us even further down an appropriate path, I believe. So I regretfully can't support this recommendation here tonight, Councillor Stutchbury or Councillor Cameron. I believe we should be making a decision for these developers because they can develop this otherwise. If we don't approve it, they can go back to their original. And I am very conscious of the fact that they have made arrangements so that access can be facilitated to the people who own property behind this development, so further up the hill. They have undertaken a number of other things to ensure that this is a better development. So I think we should be supporting that tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Glacken. I do have another speaker for Councillor Thurley.
Yes, I would rather we had been able to determine the application tonight. However, Councillor Stutchbury has pointed out there are 6 councillors here. If the vote were to be 3-3, it would require you to give a casting vote. I believe that's unfair, and I believe all 9 councillors should be present to make their decision and make their decision known to the community. So I support Councillor Stutchbury's deferral. This need only be for another fortnight. Our first meeting in March is only 2 weeks away. So I don't like to do it, but I think it's a wise move.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There's no indication of further speakers for or against. I personally have my own view on this development that's unlikely to change in 2 weeks' time, but I appreciate the comments regarding councillors having the opportunity to have their views on the record about this development, and I'm happy to revisit it in 2 weeks' time. Councillor Stutchbury, would you like to close debate?
Look, in closing, I'd like to apologise to the developers for delaying their application should this amended motion be successful, but I think that it's in the best interests of them and us and the community that all available councillors be present to give their thoughts on this particular DA. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. I'll now put the motion as a division. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Con, Councillor King and Councillor Thurley. Those against, Councillor Glacken. That motion is carried. I need a mover for the next item, please, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move the council receive and adopt the revised budget estimates for the 2019-2020 financial year.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, would you like to speak to that?
Not particularly. These are matters which have been flagged to us before and a fairly routine motion.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, speaking for.
I'm sorry, I meant to second the motion.
Oh.
Acting.
With no indication of any speakers for or against, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. Councillor King.
Okay. 13.3. I move that the council agree in principle to further explore the following initiatives. A, an enhanced service level for the Hume Freeway between the Spirit of Progress Bridge and Davey Road interchange. B, an increase in state funding allocation to maintain the freeway corridor through Albury. C, a community participation program in maintaining the Hume Freeway corridor. And D, council consider future investment in value and add initiatives as part of the upcoming budget preparations and or when budget funding becomes available.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor King, would you like to speak to that motion?
Yes, look, this is something that I commend the staff on getting on board very quick and chasing up some answers regarding the really deplorable condition of the Hume Freeway from the Murray River to the Davey Road interchange. I think there's a good opportunity here for us as a community to involve ourselves in enhancing our gateways and making sure that our front door is given the best possible makeover in the near future. I read in the report that there's some comments about the funding being taken away from other parts of New South Wales, which I don't particularly care about at all, and I'm sure just as much as they don't care about us. I would like to remind councillors that when the Hume Freeway was opened, there was a 10-year warranty that the builder, Abbey Group, had to provide, and as a part of that deal, they had a 3-man crew permanently based out at Catherine Crescent, and they had a couple of trucks, and their job was to maintain and warranty the freeway for 10 years. On the day they left, the freeway was unmaintained virtually and went downhill. So that's probably what the New South Wales government, whichever one it was at the time, sort of thought of what people think of the Hume Freeway outside Albury. So I employ this motion that we get it back to
a good condition, removing litter, and that we put our best foot forward for visitors coming into the city.
Thanks, Councillor King. I've got a question from Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, as Madam Chair this evening. Is it a question through you to the most relevant member of staff? Would it be possible for us to erect some form of poster, signage, advertising to indicate that the freeway is maintained by the state government?
I imagine Mr Ferris.
Through you, Madam Chair. We could certainly ask the question. I'm not sure that it would be granted approval.
I'm happy to
Thank you.
have that as a possible future opportunity. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got another speaker for Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Look, yes, I do support this item, although I must say I'm a bit disappointed. There were two suggestions amongst the dot points, suggestion number 4 and suggestion number 5, that were not recommended by staff. To me, they struck me as being an ideal solution to the problem. One was that Council contributes additional funding towards freeway maintenance, because pretty clearly the amount of funding that's allocated at present is completely insufficient. And if anyone thinks it is sufficient, then they're kidding themselves. And secondly, item number 5, Council assumes management and delivery of ongoing freeway maintenance. Now, I would have thought this is a way that we could retake control of roads we're continually losing control over to the feds and the state. We could have taken it on and probably done it more efficiently and better and a bit more reactively. But anyway, staff didn't recommend dot points 4 and 5, which disappointed me. But aside from that, yeah, the rest of the suggestions are good. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Stutchbury. I've got another question from Councillor King.
Yes, through you, Deputy Chair. Just in regards to the funding to the relevant member of staff, I noticed in the report that the focus has been on RMS transport departments. Is there any other opportunities for any other state government or federal government agencies that we could try and leverage some money off, whether it's a beautification idea or whether it's building regional cities, some other thing, and we include the freeway beautification as a part of an overall bigger lobbying request?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Madam Chair. Certainly, and that's the intent, is that we continue to look for possible grant funding opportunities along the way. That might be around entrances to our city, where we can do some master planning, how some of those areas might look. As discussed in the report, there's some opportunities perhaps to have the community involved in tree planting days and things like that, which are sponsored by certain section of state government as well. So I think there's opportunities to complement the existing funding that RMS are allocating, besides lobbying the state government to increase that, as we can see the current level of funding isn't adequate to meet our expectations.
Thank you. I've got another speaker for Councillor Thurley.
Just briefly, I do support this motion. I think the report itself and the motion really do set this out as something important to us. I would hate that the council had suggested that we take over funding unless it was to become a tollway, and then perhaps I could. The cost of maintaining this bit of road would be far beyond council's budget, and nor should it be in council's budget. This is a state highway and should be funded by the appropriate people. We should continue to lobby hard for the appropriate level of funding from the relevant levels of government. But I do like us getting involved more as a community to put that message to government. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no indication of any further speakers for or against. Councillor King, would you like to close debate?
Yes, I'd just like to say a couple of triggers there from the discussion with the council group is that this is the main highway between Australia's two biggest capital cities, and it should reflect its maintenance. It doesn't paint a pretty picture at the moment, and that certainly in regards to funding, I just urge the council staff to think outside just dealing with RMS, because it does represent a lot of other things other than just a road through the city. It's our entrance and it's our exit. So hopefully that will be taken on board as well.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. Need a mover for the next item, please, councillors. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair, to move the recommendation as a motion that Council adopt the draft Albury City Information Guide 2019-2020 as presented. Thank you.
Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, would you like to speak to that motion?
It's simply a procedural matter, deals with many and varied aspects of information pertaining to Council and the relationship with other organisations. Happy to move it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no indication of any speakers for or against. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. Need a mover for the next item, please. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you, to move the recommendation, which I'm rapidly trying to find, that Council receive and note the community engagement comments received and responses, endorse the refined Riverside Precinct concept designs and proceed to detailed design for stage 1, 2A and 2B, and endorse a staged delivery program that would be included in future budgets and as grant funding becomes available. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second that motion.
Councillor Glacken, would you like to speak to that motion?
This is a very important part of a very long strategy that Council and our community has been involved in for quite a period of time. It incorporates significant parts of gardens and public spaces that are heavily utilised by many members of our community, but they are also spaces that are quite iconic for an outside person coming to visit our community. Back some years ago, when we were looking at the Albury 2030, one of the significant factors that came from the community, was that they wanted to make more of the river precinct and more of the relationship that we as people, as a community, visitors and residents have with that river, to ensure that we better understood our relationship with what is, in effect, the biggest river in Australia. It is a fantastic river, and it has a very long history with this area, not just because it's been here for hundreds of thousands of years, or millions of years, but also because of the trade that went up and down the river, and also the crossing of the river as well. So I think this is a great report indicating that we're moving forwards with this development, and the access to the river is an important aspect of this report as well, enabling greater access to the river and to the river precinct. So I'm very happy to be able to move this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. I've had a request on behalf of the people watching the meeting on our live stream to read the title of the item. So we're debating item 13.5, which is the Albury Riverside Precinct Updated Concept Designs Public Exhibition Results.
Thank you.
I have a question from Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Acting Madam Mayor. Through you to the most appropriate member of staff, I was reading the report with great interest, and a common theme, I wouldn't say it was the majority of public comment, but a common theme was criticism of the amount of concrete in the design. Now, I didn't particularly think there was a lot of concrete myself in the design, but I'm just wondering, has that feedback been taken on board, and what's the view of staff on that?
Mr Costello.
Thanks for the question, and through you, Madam Deputy Chair. Those concerns were certainly taken on board and are fed back through to the designer. There's been some minor refinement in that hardening of some areas, but it's probably fair to say that the hardening is confined to those major areas that are already hardened. So there's not a significant increase, I suggest, in the amount of overall hardened area. It's been, where possible, it's been retained in those existing areas, the existing roadways and pathways.
And if I may, Madam Acting Mayor, the person who contributed who was concerned about snakes, is that considered a big problem? I mean, snakes are endemic in that region along the riverbank. It may not be something we should readily dismiss.
Mr Costello.
Through you, Madam Deputy Chair, as with all our natural areas, we would have appropriate signage warning of any particular hazards that may be in the area, including snakes, that may be one of which.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if the snakes will read the signs, but
I'll take that as a comment. It doesn't seem like there's any indication of further speakers for or against. I'd like the opportunity to voice my comments in favour of this as well, particularly noting the substantial changes that were made from the initial design to this refined design, and I think that's really taken on board a lot of the feedback that we've received. This is obviously an item of huge interest to the community, with hundreds of submissions to the original concept and 15 quite detailed submissions received now. And obviously people have different interests in that precinct, but I think this refined concept really does strike the right balance, that we've retained a significant amount of green grassed area that wasn't retained in the original design. The amount of hard stand was reduced from the original design, and there's now an indication of 130 new trees, which I think will be really fantastic to see for our community and really balances the multiple users of the space. Councillor Glacken, would you like to close debate?
No, that's fine. You can consider yours just having closed it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. That brings us to 13.6, the gas reticulation at Nexus Industrial Precinct. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and noting, as you have just done, that it's the gas reticulation. I move the recommendation as a motion that Council not invite tenders for the reticulation of industrial gas supply to the Nexus Industrial Precinct due to the following reasons. 1 and 2, the works required to be undertaken by AGNL are non-contestable, and it is not possible to receive quotes for those works from alternative suppliers, and therefore there is unavailability of competitive tenders, and, I'm sorry, the font is a bit small for me, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to finalise negotiations and arrangements in relation to the mains extraction works agreement with AGNL. C, authorise its seal to be affixed to the mains extension works agreement with AGNL, and any other documents deemed necessary in the presence of two signatures authorised to affix the seal pursuant to Regulation 400 of the Local Government General Regulation 2005 and Council's associated procedures. And D, authorise the use of the council funds to remedy the deficit in funding provided by the New South Wales Government with respect to the project completion. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, would you like to speak to that motion?
Yes, this is a very important stage for the Nexus development and our new industrial area. It's some considerable years ago that work was first mooted for this area. It's taken a number of years to be able to get to this stage, but the last 3 years have been extremely positive and very good for this development itself. This has taken our staff a number of years to be able to achieve this outcome, and they have negotiated very heavily, and we as a community will benefit from this industrial area being better facilitated, and it will encourage the organisations that I know are dealing currently with council. It gives us an opportunity to continue and grow employment opportunities within our community, and so I can only commend that we deal with this evening in this what is really the most appropriate way, and really in many respects the only way that we can deal with this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. Councillor King.
Through you, Deputy Madam Chair. Just in relation to the money that the council are going to contribute to this, to the relevant member of staff. So it's 270 odd thousand, and I see in the report that it's coming out of the Economic Development Incentive Fund. Is that the money that we set aside to entice people to come to set up business?
Ms Squire.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Yes, it is. So we have in our 4-year delivery program an annual allocation of $300,000 per year. The operating allocation for this financial year is not yet expended. So the intention would be to utilise those funds from this current financial year because we don't expect to expend it this year. We will have then future allocations in future years to support investment attraction and facilitation as required, and certainly expect to recover the expenditure over the long term through the development and sale of Nexus.
Councillor Stutchbury, question.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. My question is to the most relevant member of staff. I understand the reasoning behind not putting this out to tender. I read the document and I understand the document. However, having read through a number of previous tender documents, sometimes the tendered amount can vary quite wildly, some by as much as double or triple. So, at least when we get to look at multiple tenders for a job, we get to look at a bit of a spread of the potential cost. But here, with this one, we don't, for the reasons outlined above, and we are left with the tendered amount of a bit over $2 million. So I thought, yeah, I'm not super comfortable with this because I haven't got much to go on. So I went to Google and I Googled how much to reticulate piped gas underground to 450 hectares, and I didn't get anything because it ain't out there. So I've got no way of knowing whether $2 million is going to do it. So my question is in two parts. Part one, how reliable is this proposed figure of just over $2 million? Do we actually believe it? Do we think that it's kind of like, yeah, it's written in black ink and it's indelible? And worst case scenario, it goes over. Where do we get the cash from to pay for it if it goes over?
Ms Squire.
Thanks for the question. Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Understand your concern. The reality is that this provider, their pricing structure is monitored by the National Gas Regulator. So there are some control mechanisms in place that they must comply with in terms of providing cost estimates for infrastructure connectivity as the sole provider. In terms of the second part of your question around possible cost overruns, the last 12 months they have worked to develop these detailed designs. They own and control the gas infrastructure that it's connecting to. Clearly they are experienced in this field. Certainly our staff have done a lot of work in providing information about the site. We have undertaken Aboriginal cultural heritage assessments on the proposed corridor. So the likelihood of risks, there is always a likelihood of risk, but certainly we, based on the work that's been done to date, that's extremely minimal. And the reason we've seen a variation in their original quote versus their final agreement cost estimate is because they have done that additional due diligence around the provision of the infrastructure and the cost to construct.
Thank you. Councillor King, did you have another question?
I had a follow-up from the last one. Just in relation to this Economic Development Incentive Fund, and if you could refresh my memory, was it in this budget or did we have it in the previous budget and in this budget as well?
Ms Squire?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, yes, the answer is yes, we had it in the previous financial year and this financial year. So we have an allocation of 300,000 in our forward estimates on an ongoing basis to provide council with the opportunity to grant incentives if it sees fit. If it doesn't, then any unexpended funds are returned to general revenue as savings.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, so probably a little off topic though. Can you give me a rundown of the initiatives that we've taken to actually put this money out that we, council motion, put aside, rather than spending it on a gas pipeline? And was there any carryover from last year to this year? And was the carryover of this economic fund from last year to this year?
Ms Squire?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, no, we did not carry over the funds from last financial year, as I recall, but I may have to take that on notice to double check. But I don't believe we carried the funds over. And the second part of your question, I think, was around what we're doing to promote. Our investment attraction promotion is centred around our Invest Albury Wodonga campaign and the associated elements of that, which includes things like promoting Nexus on commercialrealestate.com and then putting out our Invest Albury Wodonga messaging through a whole range of different communication channels nationally. As councillors are aware, we are in discussions with a number of parties at the moment, and certainly they are often ongoing, and the dynamics change from month to month. But certainly there is good, strong interest there. There's every possibility that we may need to draw or seek to invite an investor to utilise those economic development incentive funds in due course, but they would all be subject to a confidential report to council.
Follow-up question?
Yes, certainly when I voted for this Economic Development Incentive Fund, it wasn't to subsidise the gas pipeline. It was to economic develop initiatives so that people would come and set up, and I'm not totally sure that it was all based around Nexus. It was around all of the local government authority of Albury. So, and again, I'm looking at the 270,000, which is not, in the scheme of things, a huge amount of money. Are we shooting ourselves in the foot by taking that money away, not actively promoting other areas of Albury and then plonking that money into the pipeline, which we have to pay for up front and they won't build in 2 years? All right, and then it's going to take 48 weeks to build it. That's my question.
Councillor King, I might take that as a comment rather than a question.
Well, no, there was a question in it.
Can you repeat the question?
Do you think it's counterproductive that we take that money out of the initiative, the Economic Initiative Fund, and put it into a gas pipeline that we won't get the net benefit from for a minimum of 3 years, because I mean, it's going to take a year to build it? That's the question.
Ms Squire.
Thanks for the question, Councillor King, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. If we had a situation where we had a strong demand for investor incentives, we would, between now and the 30th of June, we would come back to council to give you an opportunity to consider that. In identifying that 300K, what we've identified is there is funds available within our current 1-year operational plan that we can utilise to fund this without increasing our total expenditure. But as I said, if we did have an occasion where between now and 30 June we had an investor who was seeking incentives from council, we would certainly come back to council. Council could consider that as part of its quarterly review or on merit.
Thank you. I have no indication of any further speakers. Councillor Glacken, would you like to close debate on this item?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Notwithstanding Councillor King's concerns about the 300,000, the significant amount of that being utilised to support the gas infrastructure for this development, I still believe this is a great development, and I actually believe that the use of that enables a number of potential businesses, or potentially enables a number of businesses to receive economic benefit because the gas, that will enable the gas to be at Nexus, and that is one of the significant requirements of many industries. So I believe we are tonight spreading that economic injection across potentially in fact, in reality, all of those lots out at Nexus. And I think that's a fantastic way to be able to utilise that funding that at the moment has not been earmarked for another industry or business to incentivise them to move to our location. We could hold that money back and wait for one business to apply for that money. However, we wouldn't be able to fund the gas unless we as councillors agreed that we would find it from somewhere else. And in essence, the money utilised or used in this way does mean that we are really offering an incentive to a number of businesses, to a number of potential users of that site to come and use that facility. So I think this is a great decision, and I can only hope that councillors will support this evening to enable Nexus to go to that next level. Thank you, councillors.
Thanks, Councillor Glacken. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. That brings us to the officers' reports for noting corporate health indicators for December 2019. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move the Council receive and note the December 2019 Corporate Health Indicators Report.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, would you like to speak to that report?
Yes, and it would come as no surprise that I wish to comment on the injury statistics. We had something like 34, a number of incidents over the December quarter, 8 a month, 2 a week, and we had 3 lost time injuries. So our lost time injury frequency rate is now above 10. That is not good enough. And in the additional information I've got, we're talking about 137 injuries, and 23% of them were manual handling injuries. So we've got a systemic problem. We've either got poor equipment and we need men to use their muscles to do stuff, or we've got improper practices or bad practices. Somehow, to break this cycle, if that's the main source of injury, we need either training, physiotherapy input, some movement specialist to look at what's happening and come up with some answers, because this is costing us a fortune in workers' compensation. We had our premiums down significantly a few years ago. We had our LTIFR down to, I don't know, less than 8, probably close to 5, I think, at one stage. But we're now back at 10.5, and that means our workers' comp premiums will be probably $500,000 higher. We need to act on this. It's not just a money issue. It's 3 lost time injuries, so people off work, can't work, injured, can't do the other things they would do as a parent, partner, father, mother, whatever. It's just not good enough, and we've got to look at a new approach, because whatever we're doing now is not working. So I support the report. The rest of it shows we're in a very healthy position with our finances and everything else, but this is one area that I think we're failing and we need to do something different, and I look forward to hearing some initiatives as to what we will do about this.
Thanks, Councillor Thurley. I have no further indications of any speakers for or against. Would you like to close debate on that?
That'll do.
I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. That brings us to item 14.2, the Albury City Operational Plan Quarterly Progress Update. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move that Council receive and note the Albury City Operational Plan Quarterly Progress Update, December 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, would you like to speak to that motion?
No, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Stutchbury. I have a question through to the relevant member of staff, I believe would be Mr Ferris, regarding the KPIs for environmental planning assessment. These are well below target and have been for multiple progress reports on the operational plan. Hoping for an update, please, on resourcing in that department.
Yes, through you, Deputy Mayor. So that is an area of focus for us as part of our review. We are currently interviewing for a development compliance officer as an additional staff member to help us in that area. We have recently, as of Saturday, advertised for a team leader environment and having a focus on our environment and sustainability activities to head that area up. We'll do further evaluation of that team once that team leader's in place, and our planning team are undergoing their review at the moment, and we'll have some report back during March with regard to that, which again will focus on delivery in that development team. And filling some vacant spots. We've got a number of long-term vacant spots in that area. So once that high-level review is done, we'll certainly start moving to fill some of those spots as well. So appreciate that that we're below target, but we have got actions in place to address that.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear some progress is being made. I have no indication of any further speakers for or against. Councillor Stutchbury, would you like to close? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. Brings us to item 14.3, the Service and Efficiency Review Program Progress Update. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move the Council receive and note the 6-month Service and Efficiency Review Program Progress Update.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, would you like to speak to that motion?
Just briefly to note that it has been a very successful program over the years since it started, and still giving benefits back to council, so I commend the staff on this one.
I have a question from Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy Mayor. I'm sorry, Madam Acting Mayor. It's correct, isn't it? Thank you. So I would like to ask, through you to the most appropriate member of staff, a question about staff full-time equivalent manning levels. If there's a gender-neutral term for manning, I'd be happy if someone could elucidate me.
Can I suggest staffing?
Thank you. Staffing levels. So essentially, I'd like to ask, how many full-time equivalent positions does Albury City employ now, including the CEO and the senior staff? And how many did we employ 2 years ago or thereabouts?
Mr Zagnich?
I'll take that on notice if you like, Councillor Cameron. Probably give you the exact figures then.
Thank you.
Is the appropriate member of staff, which appears to be Mr Zagnich, is that, is he able to hazard a guess, is it more or less?
Mr Zagnich?
Our FTE is higher, but not as a result of the restructure. We've been providing additional resources over time as council's focus and remit areas have increased. Certainly at a senior management level there's been a reduction in directors from 5 back to 2. Group leaders are now known as service leaders, reduction from 12 to 10, and the current review of the team leader cohort's underway. And we'll be able to provide those figures to you once that review's done. So that's in a general overview, but I can provide the more detailed responses as requested.
But if I could just finish on, please, Acting Madam Mayor. if I heard correctly, you would think that the full-time equivalents are more than they were 2 years ago.
Yes.
Thank you. I look forward to the detail.
Got another question from Councillor King.
Yes, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Can you give me the definition of a full-time employee, and does it include permanent part-time?
Mr. Zagnich?
Yes, definition is the 38-hour or 35-hour week, depending on their classification. Full-time equivalent doesn't include part-time. No, it would be the full-time equivalent total number of hours, full-time equivalent hours across the organisation.
I've got another question from Councillor Cameron.
If I could just clarify this point, because I don't want to have all the work done on getting the detail and then in response to my previous question and then, have issues over detail. What I'm seeking is a measure of the full-time equivalent hours, so that someone who was part-time and worked 20 hours a week would be 35ths of a full FTE.
Sorry, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, Acting Mayor. The FTE detail is actually in the report appended to in the report to tonight's council meeting. If you're looking for full-time FTE and those definitions.
That'd be great, but I can't access my attachments, so there's no printed out.
All right, we'll get those to you.
There are no indications of any further speakers for or against. Councillor Thurley, would you like to close debate? I will put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. And that brings us to item 14.4, the investment balances report. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I'll move the recommendation as a motion that Council receive and note the investment balances report for the month of January 2020.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Glacken, would you like to speak to that motion, please?
Yes, simply to raise the fact that, as we all know, interest rates are down. We do have a number of investments, significant investments, and unfortunately, try as they may, the people undertaking those investments on our behalf, whilst they're doing a sterling job, are not able to squeeze more out of the accounts than they are at the moment. So I acknowledge that. Thank you.
I've got a question from Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I hope you'll permit me to ask the relevant member of staff a philosophical question. When I started on council 3.5 years ago, our investment balances totalled about 105 million. And I see that during the course of last year, we got up to 180 million and now we're down to just above 160 million. It's great. It's great to have all of this loot in the bank. But what are we actually going to do with it? I mean, is it there to save us from a disaster, or is it there to spend on the citizens who've actually paid us this money, or what? I mean, I know it's kind of like a deep question, and it sounds like I've been on marijuana, which I haven't, I promise you. But, I mean, are we actually going to use this for something useful for our community?
Mr. Finlayson.
Thank you for the question. Yes, we're required to hold some funding to make sure we can meet our debts when they fall due. However, we also hold funding for future projects. For example, with our water and wastewater, there are large infrastructure projects that will be required in the future, which we're holding funds for, such as the expansion of the Waterview wastewater treatment plant.
Thank you. I have no indication of any further speakers. Councillor Glacken, would you like to close debate?
No, thank you. Interesting question. I'm just happy to have it put, yeah.
Councillors, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. That brings us to item 14.5, the Works Program Status Report for December. Councillor King.
Yes, I would like to move that the Council receive and note the status of the 2019-2020 Works Program as at 31 December 2019.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Madam Deputy Mayor, I second that motion.
Councillor King, would you like to speak to that report?
Not at the moment.
I have no indication of any speakers for or against. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. That brings us to 14.6, the Lavington Sports Ground naming stakeholder engagement. Councillor Cameron.
I'd like to move that Council receive and note the contents of this report.
Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion.
Councillor Cameron, would you like to speak to that report?
Yes, I would, Madam Acting Mayor. Lavington became part of Albury in the 1950s, where previously it had been part of Hume's-shire. And ever since that time, in my opinion, Lavington has been treated as a second-class area in Albury culturally, if not economically. The people of the people of Lavington and even North Albury do often express to me the view that they don't get an equitable share of the city's resources or of the recognition of the great contribution and the great amount of industry over the years when we had a lot of industry in the city, that North Albury and Lavington have contributed to the city's growth and well-being. Any consideration in the future of renaming this facility that does not continue to use the name Lavington will be met from me with great resistance. There is very little recognition, in my view, given to Lavington and its inhabitants, and I will be very unhappy to discover that there's a move to change or to delete the name Lavington from this facility in the future. It may be appropriate to call it Lavington Stadium or some other name that incorporates Lavington. We shall see, and we should properly await the public feedback on that. I would like Madam Mayor to ask a question. I can do that separately, or I can do that now if you wish.
You can ask the question.
Thank you. My question through you to the most appropriate member of staff is to check that I understand the process in the renaming of this facility from now on, which I note from the report will need to be in alignment with Council's policy on renaming major facilities. What happens next after the noting of this report if this motion is carried?
Ms Squire.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, thanks for the question, Councillor Cameron. So once we actually receive the feedback from members of the community, we will collate that feedback and we will present a report to Council. We will explore options based on the feedback and then we will put a recommendation to Council for consideration.
Thank you very much. That's very much in order in my view.
Another speaker for Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I think it's a great opportunity for our community, all areas, all suburbs within our community, to be able to assist us with the naming, an appropriate naming opportunity for the what is currently the Lavington Sports Ground. And who knows, someone might come up with Black Range, which would be appropriate for that area, because my understanding is Lavington, the back of Lavington used to be called Black Range, so who knows? I think there'll be lots of opportunity for people to make suggestions, and I look forward to our staff having a huge number that they are processing as the output of this consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. Another speaker for. I have no indication of any speakers against. Councillor King.
Yes, I like the report. I also like the fact that they included regional in it. I think that certainly Albury-Wodonga is the oasis of this region, and that the sports arena will house and host a lot of sports, a lot of visitors from out of town, and that it's certainly in its future for funding and those sort of things probably needs to be designated a regional centre for sport, and I think that should be high on the thoughts of people in the naming, that it is a central regional. Albury is the centre of the region, as is Wodonga, and that it will be the best sports arena, hopefully, between Melbourne and Sydney, and it has to reflect that regional context.
Thanks. I have no indication of any further speakers for or against. Councillor Cameron, would you like to close debate?
Yes, there's any number of things that this could be called. If we wanted to go for something historical, certainly Black Range would be an option. But if we're going for something historical, then why would we not name it after some significant place name in the Wiradjuri language of the traditional owners. I would have thought, if you're going to do that, let's do that. But let's not prejudge the outcome. But what I am committed to is retaining the name of Lavington in some form. So let's look forward to that. Thank you.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. Brings us to item 14.7, the monthly development statistics for January. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, move the recommendation as a motion that Council receive and note the information in the monthly development statistics report for January 2020. Thank you.
Councillor Staley.
I second the motion.
Councillor Glacken, would you like to speak to that motion?
No, thank you, staff, for providing us with this information.
I have no indication of any speakers to this item. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. We have no delegates report for noting. I've had no indications of any notices of urgent business. And that brings us to confidential matters. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, to move the recommendation as a motion that Council move into confidential to discuss items CM 17.1 and CM 17.2, as these are confidential items exclusive of press and public on the grounds that the matters relate to in item CM 17.1. With regards to that, the matters are for information are the following. Information that would, if disclosed, confer a commercial advantage on a person with whom the council is conducting or proposes to conduct business. This is with reference to the Local Government Act 1993, number 30, section 10A 2C, and with regards to 17.2, the matters and information are the following: commercial information of a confidential nature that would, if disclosed, prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied it, with reference again to Local Government Act 1993, section 30, section 10A2DI. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Are there any statements or submissions from the public regarding the reasons as identified for these confidential items 17.1 and 17.2? There are no submissions received. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. to read those out. The confidential item 17.1 moved by Councillor Thurley and seconded by Councillor King, that Council A authorises the Chief Executive Officer to finalise negotiations and arrangement in relation to the deed of call option outlined in this report. B authorises its seal to be affixed to the deed of call option and any other documents deemed necessary to complete the transaction in the presence of two signatories authorised to affix the seal pursuant to Regulation 400 of the Local Government General Regulation 2005 and Council's associated procedure. C, make application to the New South Wales Minister for Local Government seeking consent for a potential joint venture or partnership with Wodonga City Council. And D, receive a further report on the outcomes of the due diligence process to determine next steps. That motion was carried. And item 17.2, the Nexus Industrial Precinct Development Update, moved by Councillor Glacken, seconded by Councillor Stutchbury, that Council receives and notes the status update in relation to the Nexus Industrial Precinct was carried. And I will close tonight's council meeting at 7:22 p.m. Thanks, councillors. It was before confidential. There wasn't any.